Imagine a steel box so small your spine snaps into a curved question mark. You cannot stand, you cannot lie down, while the King of France stands in the shadows, listening to the rhythmic clatter of your breaking bones. He calls these cages his little daughters. But what happens when the weaver of this terrifying web becomes the prey? Beneath the stone foundations of the fortress, the air remains thick with the oppressive weight of centuries. It is a world of eternal dampness, where the very walls seem to weep beads of cold moisture that collect in stagnant pools on the uneven floor. The silence here is not empty but heavy, saturated with the faint, metallic scent of oxidation and the sharp, cloying stench of human waste that has seeped into the porous rock over long months of confinement. Every breath taken in this subterranean void feels like a struggle against the crushing pressure of the earth above, as if the darkness itself has a physical density that smothers the living. High above the freezing floor, suspended by thick chains that creak with every infinitesimal movement, hangs a narrow steel structure known to its creator as a little daughter. This iron box is a masterpiece of architectural cruelty, designed with such precise malice that it denies its inhabitant the most basic human dignity of posture. The metal bars are cold and slick with grime, forming a geometric trap that segments the darkness of the cell into thin, vertical slivers of despair for the men trapped within its jagged embrace. There is no wood or straw here to offer comfort, only the unforgiving bite of rusted iron against shivering, feverish skin. Inside this cage, a man exists in a state of permanent distortion, his body forced to adapt to a space that was never meant for living flesh. He can neither stand upright to face his creator nor lie flat to find a moment of restorative sleep, for the dimensions of the iron walls press against his skull and his heels simultaneously. Over the course of many hundreds of days, his spine has buckled and twisted, slowly curving into the grotesque shape of a question mark as his muscles wither into useless, stringy fibers. His reality has been reduced to the narrow confines of this metal coffin, where every second is an eternity of cramped and silent agony. The once fluid movement of his limbs has been stolen by the unrelenting pressure of the steel bars until his joints have begun to fuse into rigid, calcified knots. Each breath is a labor of calculated effort, as his ribcage is compressed by the curvature of his own bones, making every gasp for air a sharp reminder of his physical ruin. His skin has grown translucent and pale, stretched thin over a skeletal frame that has forgotten the warmth of the sun or the simple relief of stretching a limb toward an open and inviting horizon. He has become a living monument to the patience of a monarch who values the slow erosion of the human spirit over the swiftness of death. Emerging from the deep shadows of the vaulted corridor, a solitary figure approaches the hanging cage with a slow, deliberate gait. He is not dressed in the shimmering silks one might expect of a sovereign, but rather in a threadbare coat of dull gray wool that has seen better decades. His shoulders are hunched forward, mirroring the posture of his prisoners, as if he too is trapped within an invisible cage of his own making, bound by duty and a soul-crushing fear. Upon his head sits a battered hat adorned with a row of cheap, leaden figurines of saints that jingle softly with every tilt of his head, their metallic faces frozen in silent, hollow prayer. These mass-produced icons are his only confidants, their frozen faces witnessing the silent negotiations he conducts with the divine and the damned. His face is a map of deep furrows and twitching nerves, framed by a thin nose and eyes that dart incessantly into the corners of the room, searching for the hidden daggers of imagined assassins in every pocket of darkness. This is the King of France, yet he brings no guards or executioners to witness this private audience in the bowels of the earth. He does not demand a confession for crimes against the crown, nor does he offer a single word of hope or a promise of mercy to the broken men suspended before him. Instead, he maintains an absolute and terrifying silence, his breathing synchronized with the dripping of water from the ceiling as he stares at the iron bars with an intensity that borders on religious fervor. The king stands perfectly still, tilting his head slightly to catch a specific sound that he prizes above the music of any courtly lute or the cheers of a victorious army. It is the rhythmic, hollow clatter of the prisoner's brittle bones striking against the iron rods as the man shudders in a fit of involuntary tremors from the cold and the pain. To the monarch, this staccato beat is the melody of absolute security, confirming that his enemy is truly broken. It is the year 1469, a time when justice is indistinguishable from the personal vengeance of a king who trusts no one but his own shadow and the stars above. The king believes that the only way to truly possess a kingdom is to know the exact condition of every potential threat, keeping them close enough to hear their labored breathing and watch their slow decay. He has spent his entire reign perfecting the art of the slow collapse, preferring the lingering psychological destruction of a cell to the swift finality of the headsman's axe. For him, a dead enemy is silent, but a caged enemy provides a constant testimony to his superior will. As he watches the prisoner's fingers claw feebly at the rusted floor of the cage, the king feels a surge of dark satisfaction that no amount of gold could ever provide to his hollow heart. He remembers this man as a proud lord who once spoke of rights and ancient privileges, a man who dared to look a sovereign in the eye with a sense of equality. Now, that pride has been ground into the dust of the dungeon floor, leaving behind only a whimpering creature that exists solely to validate the king's absolute and terrifying power over every single living soul within his borders. The transformation from a nobleman to a broken beast is the true crown jewel of his administration. There is a strange intimacy in this encounter, as if the king is drawing life from the vitality his victim is losing with every hour of confinement. He leans closer to the cage, the leaden saints clinking against the bars, and for a moment his eyes meet the unseeing stare of the men inside. The torchlight flickers on the damp stone walls, casting long shadows that dance like specters around them, blurring the line between the living and the ghosts of the past. His hands, stained with the ink of secret letters, twitch against his sleeves as he finds clarity in the visceral reality of a body that has been physically broken by his unyielding and merciless will. Finally, with a small, stiff nod to the leaden figures on his hat, the monarch turns away from the hanging cage and prepares to ascend back to the world of light and lies. He leaves the prisoner to the silence and the rats, knowing that the image of the bent spine and the fused joints will sustain him through the next cabinet meeting or the signing of a treacherous treaty. As his footsteps fade into the distance, the only sound left in the dungeon is the slow, rhythmic creak of the chains, echoing the heartbeat of a kingdom ruled by fear and iron. The spider has checked his web, and for tonight, the threads remain strong and the prey remains trapped. The Kingdom of France is no longer a collection of provinces but a vast, living map spread across the king's mind. Every village, every bridge, and every mountain pass is connected by invisible, sticky threads of information that converge toward a single, dark center. These lines are made of spoken whispers, stolen letters, and the silent promises of men who have sold their souls for a pouch of gold. In this new era, the geography of power is defined not by the reach of a sword, but by the speed at which a secret can travel from a border tavern to the royal desk. This intangible web binds the nobility and the peasantry alike to the will of a man they rarely see. Deep within the Valley of the Lawyer stands the fortress of Plessis-les-Tours, a structure that contemporaries have come to call the spider's nest. It is a place of heavy shadows and narrow corridors where the festive music of the Middle Ages has been replaced by the scratching of quills and the rustle of parchment. Here, the sun struggles to penetrate the small, barred windows, and the courtiers walk with soft steps, fearing that a loud word might disrupt the king's fragile equilibrium. The castle is not a palace of joy, but a laboratory of statecraft where the air is thick with the scent of old paper and the constant, lingering taste of unspoken anxieties and royal suspicions. Louis XI looks upon the glittering world of chivalry with a cold and undisguised contempt that shocks the traditional nobility of the realm. While other monarchs waste their treasuries on grand tournaments where knights break lances for the sake of empty honor, Louis sees only a foolish waste of resources and manpower. He finds no glory in the clash of steel or the bright banners of the tilting ground, viewing such displays as childish games played by men who do not understand the true nature of power. To him, a single well-placed bribe is worth more than 10,000 cavalrymen charging across a bloody field in a desperate and futile attempt at heroic legacy. His true army does not wear polished breastplates or ride on caparisoned chargers, but instead consists of a silent legion of bureaucrats and clerks. These men occupy cramped offices in the depths of the palace, their eyes growing weak as they decipher coded messages and forge documents in the flickering light of tallow candles. They are the interceptors of mail, the listeners at keyholes, and the masters of the written word who can destroy a reputation with a single drop of ink. This clandestine force operates in the periphery of vision, ensuring that the king is the first to know of a rebellion and the last to be surprised by any sudden betrayal from a supposed ally. Beyond the castle walls, in the winding alleys of Paris and the dark corners of regional capitals, move the silent assassins who serve as the king's final argument. They are specters in the night, men who know how to blend into a crowd or vanish into a doorway without leaving a trace of their presence. These agents are not motivated by glory or knightly vows, but by the cold, hard reality of coin and the fear of the monarch's long reach. They represent the physical manifestation of the king's will, capable of removing an obstacle with a quick strike of a blade before disappearing back into the anonymity of the urban shadows, leaving behind only a cold corpse and a mystery. In the royal mind, the The great dukes and princes of the blood are nothing more than livestock to be traded or slaughtered at a time of the king's choosing. He negotiates for the loyalty of a powerful noble with the same detached calculation a merchant uses when inspecting a herd of cattle at a regional market. Gold is his preferred weapon, and he uses it to erode the foundations of ancient houses until they collapse under the weight of their own greed. To Lewis, every man has a price, and those who claim otherwise simply have not been offered enough to reveal the true nature of their hidden ambitions, their secret desires, and the dark price of their personal integrity. The ink on his peace treaties is often still damp when the king begins to orchestrate the next betrayal of the very allies who just stood by his side. He views a signature not as a sacred oath, but as a temporary pause in a continuous struggle for total control over the destinies of his subjects. Trust is a luxury he cannot afford, and he takes a perverse pleasure in turning friends against one another before they have a chance to unite against him. Every alliance is a trap, every smile a mask, and every promise a carefully constructed lie designed to buy the precious time needed for his next decisive and ruthless maneuver in the grand game of continental supremacy. Every movement on the distant outskirts of the kingdom, from the coast of Brittany to the mountains of Burgundy, sends a vibration through the invisible threads of his network. The king sits at his desk, his fingers constantly twitching as if he can feel the tremors of a brewing storm hundreds of leagues away. His skin is chronically stained with the dark residue of ink and the red remnants of sealing wax, physical evidence of the endless stream of orders and queries he produces. He lives in a state of hypervigilance, where the fluttering of a bird in a border forest might be interpreted as a signal of a coming invasion or the arrival of a secret messenger from abroad. The open sky is a source of profound dread for the monarch, a vast and unpredictable void that offers no shelter from the prying eyes of God or the schemes of men. He prefers the claustrophobic safety of his stone chambers, where the ceilings are low and the walls are thick enough to muffle the sounds of the outside world. To walk across a wide, sunlit courtyard is an ordeal that fills him with an irrational sense of exposure and vulnerability, as if he were a soft creature without a shell. He finds solace only in the shadows, believing that the darkness is the only place where a ruler can truly see the world without being seen by those who wish to do him harm. The weight of the secrets he carries is a heavy burden that has warped his physical frame and turned his hair white long before his time. He knows the secret sins of his bishops, the hidden debts of his generals, and the private infidelities of the women who inhabit the highest circles of French society. This mountain of information is both his greatest strength and his most agonizing curse, as it prevents him from ever experiencing a single moment of genuine human connection. He is surrounded by people, yet he is utterly alone in his knowledge, trapped in a cycle of suspicion that consumes his health and his peace while the world outside continues to spin in ignorance. The administrative machinery he has constructed is an engine of perpetual fear, designed to keep every level of society in a state of constant, low-level anxiety. No official feels entirely safe in their position, knowing that their every decision is being scrutinized by the hidden eyes and ears of a king who never forgets a mistake. This culture of surveillance has created a nation of whispers, where neighbors watch one another and even the lowliest peasant understands that the king's reach extends to the furthest corners of the land. The kingdom has become a panopticon, with the Spider King sitting silently at the dark and central hub of the entire intricate mechanism. Louis XI is a man who has traded the sword for the pen, finding that words on a page have a far more lasting and devastating impact than a charge of heavy horses. His soul is as stained as his fingers, saturated with the dark compromise and cold logic required to stitch together a fractured nation into a unified whole. He does not care for the judgment of history or the hollow praise of poets, focusing only on the cold reality of territorial gains and the stabilization of his royal treasury. He is the first modern monarch, a man who understands that power is not a divine gift but a commodity to be managed with ruthless efficiency and a total lack of sentimentality. In the quiet moments of the night, when the only sound in the castle is the ticking of a mechanical clock, the king reflects on the chaos of the civil wars that preceded his reign. He remembers the weakness of his predecessors and the arrogance of the lords who once thought they could dictate terms to the crown. These memories fuel his obsession with control, driving him to weave his web ever tighter around the throat of the nobility until they can no longer breathe without his permission. He is a builder of a new order, one where the centralized state is the only true power, and all other interests must be sacrificed for its preservation against the forces of decay. The physical layout of Plessis-les-Tours is a direct reflection of the king's mental state, with its labyrinthine passages and hidden stairs designed to confuse and isolate. Every door has a heavy bolt, and every window is covered by a decorative but impenetrable iron grate that mimics the cages he keeps in the basement. It is a fortress built not just against external enemies, but against the very idea of a sudden or unexpected intrusion into the monarch's private space. The castle is a physical manifestation of his paranoia, a stone shell that protects the vulnerable and suspicious heart of a man who sees a potential assassin in every passing stranger or servant. At the royal court, loyalty is not a matter of honor but a product that is bought and sold on a daily basis, with the king acting as the supreme broker. He understands the appetites of men better than any priest, using their desire for land, titles, and gold to bind them to his service in a web of mutual obligation. He dangles rewards before his subjects like a fisherman with a lure, pulling them closer until they are caught in the intricacies of his legal and financial systems. By the time they realize they have been enslaved, they are already too dependent on the king's favor to ever consider a return to their former independence or their ancient family traditions. As the years pass, the distinction between the king and the kingdom begins to blur, until Louis XI becomes synonymous with the state itself. He is the brain of the nation, sensing every movement and reacting with a cold and clinical precision that leaves his enemies stunned and demoralized. The France he is creating is a cold and efficient machine, stripped of the romantic illusions of the past and focused entirely on the grim reality of survival and expansion. He is the master weaver, sitting in the heart of his web, watching as the old world of feudalism dies and a new world of absolute monarchy is born in the shadows of his castle chambers. The archives of the palace swell with the records of 1,000 minor betrayals, each one a thread in the tapestry of his undisputed reign. He reads through reports of distant harvests and city taxes with the same intensity he applies to reports of treason, seeing the connection between the wealth of the soil and the strength of his grip on the scepter. Nothing is too small for his attention, and no detail is beneath his dignity if it offers a slight advantage over his rivals. He has transformed the art of kingship into a science of observation and manipulation, where the data of a kingdom is analyzed to predict the behavior of its most rebellious and defiant subjects. When he walks through the damp halls of his residence, the jingling of the leaden saints on his hat serves as a reminder of his complex relationship with the heavens. He fears the judgment of God as much as he fears the daggers of men, yet he continues to build his power through means that would surely condemn any other soul to the deepest pits of hell. He bargains with the divine for more time, more insight, and more victories, offering lavish gifts to the church in exchange for a spiritual protection he does not truly feel he deserves. His piety is as calculated as his politics, a final insurance policy against the ultimate unknown that awaits him. The lords of the realm have learned to fear the arrival of a royal messenger, for the letters of Louis XI rarely carry good tidings or simple greetings. His prose is sharp and demanding, filled with subtle threats and reminders of debts that can never be fully repaid in this lifetime. To receive his attention is to be drawn into the center of the web, where the king's gaze can strip away a man's defenses and leave him exposed to the harsh light of royal scrutiny. The pen has indeed become the most feared weapon in the kingdom, a tool that can strip a family of its lands or a man of his life without the need for a single drop of blood being spilled on a field. In the end, the kingdom of France has been reshaped into the image of its king, suspicious, resilient, and focused entirely on the accumulation of power and influence. The grand map that exists in the monarch's mind has become a physical reality, a land where every path leads back to the spider's nest at the center of the world. As the sun sets over the lawyer, the king remains at his desk, his ink-stained fingers moving across a fresh sheet of parchment as he prepares the next thread for his eternal web. The silence of the night is his only companion, a quiet that he has earned through years of calculated cruelty and the systematic destruction of all who dared to oppose him. The borders of the Kingdom of France are currently trembling under the heavy shadow of the Burgundian lion, as Charles the Bold gathers his knights in a display of terrifying physical might. Charles is a man of iron and ego, a titan of the old world who believes that history is written with the blood of the brave on the open field of battle. To the Duke of Burgundy, the conflict is a grand epic of clashing steel and noble sacrifice, a theater where the strongest arm dictates the law of the land and the destiny of empires. He represents everything that the medieval world holds dear, yet he is marching toward a trap he cannot even begin to see. Louis XI looks upon this gathering storm not with the fire of a warrior, but with the cold and analytical detachment of a master clockmaker watching a faulty mechanism. He refuses to summon his banners for a fair fight, seeing no profit in the chaotic gamble of a pitched battle where a single stray arrow could undo decades of careful planning. For the King of France, a direct confrontation is a failure of intellect and a primitive surrender to the impulses of the flesh that he has long since discarded. He understands that while Charles commands the bodies of men, he intends to command the very circumstances that govern their lives and their deaths. Inside the windowless chambers of his fortress, the king retreats into a world where the only light comes from flickering torches and the low, orange glow of burning embers. The air is heavy with the scent of beeswax and old vellum, creating a sanctuary of silence where the screams of the dying on the battlefield are replaced by the soft scratching of a quill. Here, the boundaries between the physical world and the realm of the occult begin to blur as the monarch seeks a certainty that no mortal diplomat can provide. He is searching for a cosmic advantage, a hidden lever in the gears of the universe that will allow him to topple his enemies without drawing a sword. Amidst this oppressive gloom, one man is permitted a proximity that would be fatal for any other soul in the entire kingdom. Angelo Galeotti, the royal astrologer, moves through the shadows with the confidence of one who holds the keys to the future in his slender, ink-stained fingers. He is the only being allowed to touch the king's coarse garments, adjusting the heavy wool as they lean together over vast, complicated charts that map the movements of the celestial bodies. Their relationship is a symbiosis of shared secrets and cosmic whispers, a bond forged in the cold and distant light of the stars that look down upon the petty struggles of men. The table between them is strewn with intricate diagrams where circles within circles intersect to reveal the hidden architecture of the vast universe. Galeotti's fingers trace the slow and baleful path of Saturn, the planet of restriction and time, as it enters a house of conflict and sudden transformation. The king watches with unblinking eyes, his breath shallow as he searches for a sign that the heavens have finally aligned in his favor. He is not looking for a blessing or a sign of divine love, but for a window of opportunity, a momentary weakness in the fabric of fate that he can exploit to strike his unsuspecting and arrogant rivals. Their focus shifts to the aggressive glow of Mars, the bringer of war, which now looms large in a sector of the sky associated with deception and the downfall of the proud. Lewis sees in this planetary movement the perfect justification for a strike that will not be delivered by a cavalry charge, but by a sudden withdrawal of support or a whisper in the ear of a Burgundian traitor. The stars are not his masters, but his most reliable spies, providing him with a divine intelligence report that allows him to anticipate the movements of his rivals before they have even conceived of those movements in the darkness of their own primitive minds. The king's physical state during these long hours of calculation is one of intense and agonizing focus, his body hunched as if he were trying to disappear into the parchment itself. He mutters to himself in a low, gravelly voice, reciting the positions of the planets as if they were the names of his ancestors or the titles of his lost provinces. To an observer, he might appear to be a madman lost in a fever dream, but his mind is sharper than any blade ever forged in the armories of Burgundy. He is weaving the celestial and the terrestrial into a single, unbreakable cord that will eventually hang every man who dares to stand against the unification of France. As the external pressure from the rebellious vassals grows, the king's internal fear of betrayal reaches a fever pitch of near insanity. He begins to see the shadow of a dagger in every gesture and the echo of a conspiracy in every casual remark made by his remaining servants. To combat this invisible enemy, he institutes a ritual of terrifying spiritual significance that turns his court into a theater of forced devotion. Every few hours, the business of the state grinds to a halt so that every member of the household, from the highest official to the lowest scullery maid, can prove their loyalty through the medium of the sacred and the divine. Upon a velvet-covered table in the center of the hall, the king displays his collection of holy relics, encased in gold and crystal but radiating a sense of ancient and somber power. He orders his servants to approach these objects and kiss them, swearing an oath of eternal and unchanging fidelity to the crown while the king watches from the shadows. He scrutinizes the way their lips touch the cold metal and the way their eyes shift during the vow, looking for the slightest hesitation that might betray a hidden treachery. For Lewis, the sanctity of the object is a tool of interrogation, a spiritual trap designed to catch a liar in the presence of the Almighty. This constant requirement for public displays of loyalty creates a psychological strain on the court that is almost as heavy as the stone walls of the castle. The servants move through their duties with a robotic and haunted precision, their faces masks of blank obedience that hide a growing and silent resentment. They know that a single slip of the tongue or a moment of perceived disrespect could lead them directly to the iron cages in the cellar, where time and space cease to exist. The king has effectively turned his own home into a prison of the mind, where every soul is bound to his will by the dual chains of religious terror and the very real threat of physical agony. The isolation of the king grows deeper as he realizes that even the most sacred oaths can be broken by men who are desperate or greedy enough. He begins to treat the people around him as if they were inanimate objects, mere pieces on a grand and dusty chessboard that covers the entirety of Western Europe. In his mind, a duke is no different from a pawn, and a queen is merely a tool for a strategic marriage that can secure a border or a vital mountain pass. He has stripped away the humanity of his subjects, leaving behind only their utility in his grand design for a centralized and absolute power that will outlast his own fragile and failing health. This reduction of humanity to mere function allows him to move his pieces with a ruthless efficiency that his enemies cannot comprehend or counter. He does not care if a move causes suffering or destroys a noble line that has existed for 500 years, as long as it brings him one step closer to the total domination of the political landscape. The world has become a game of pure logic and cosmic timing, where the erratic emotions of men are nothing more than obstacles to be cleared away. He sits in the center of this silent board, his ink-stained fingers hovering over the map of France as he decides which piece to sacrifice next for the sake of his vision. He believes that his authority is not just a matter of inheritance, but a reflection of the cosmic order that he and Galeotti study with such obsessive devotion. Just as the planets must follow their appointed paths without deviation, so must the people of France follow the path laid out for them by their sovereign. Any attempt at independence is seen as a violation of the natural law, a rebellion against the very structure of the universe that must be corrected with absolute and unyielding force. He is the sun around which all other bodies must revolve, and he will use the very stars themselves to ensure that no one ever drifts out of his gravitational pull. The trap for Charles the Bold is being set not with soldiers, but with the careful manipulation of the Duke's own pride and the calculated movement of celestial bodies. Louis waits for the moment when the stars indicate a period of profound misfortune for those who act with haste and arrogance, knowing that Charles will be unable to resist the urge to prove his bravery. The king is content to wait in the shadows of Plessis-les-Tours, listening to the ticking of his clocks and the whispers of his astrologer, while his rival marches toward a destiny that has already been written in the cold and indifferent light of the heavens. This waiting game is the ultimate expression of the Spider King's power, a demonstration of patience that is far more terrifying than any sudden outburst of royal anger. He is a predator who understands that the most effective strike is the one that the victim never sees coming, delivered at the exact moment when they believe they have already won. As the night deepens and the planets continue their silent dance, Louis XI remains at his desk, a small and hunched figure who has successfully turned the entire world into a reflection of his own dark and brilliant mind. The chess match is reaching its endgame, and the king already knows the final score. The atmosphere in the castle becomes so thick with suspicion that even the light of the torches seems to struggle against the pervasive gloom of the royal presence. Every shadow is a potential hiding place for a spy, and every whisper is a potential code for a revolution that the king is determined to crush before it can even draw its first breath. He has become the prisoner of his own success, trapped in a cycle of control that requires him to be everywhere and see everything at all times. Yet, in this total isolation, he finds a grim and solitary satisfaction, knowing that he alone possesses the will to hold the fractured pieces of his world together. As the chapter of his life unfolds against the backdrop of the 1500s, the image of the king leaning over his astrological charts becomes the defining symbol of his reign. He is a monarch who has reached beyond the physical realm to grasp the levers of fate, using the language of the stars to translate his darkest impulses into the laws of a new and unified nation. The brave knights of Burgundy may have their glory and their songs, but the Spider King has the truth of the heavens and the cold, hard reality of his own unbreakable will. The web is finished, the stars have spoken, and the age of chivalry is about to be strangled in its sleep. The season of the Great Purges descends upon the land of France like a suffocating fog, dampening the spirits of even the most loyal courtiers. No longer content with the destruction of foreign enemies, the king turns his cold, calculating gaze inward, searching for the rod of treachery within his own inner circle. Those who once sat at the royal table, sharing the finest wines and the most delicate secrets, now find themselves looking over their shoulders in terror. The very architecture of the state is being redesigned to accommodate a new kind of silence, one that is enforced by the weight of iron and the absence of any hope for light. In the deepest recesses of the royal fortresses, a new and terrible invention begins to multiply, filling the damp air with the sound of grinding metal and heavy chains. Louis refers to these specialized instruments of confinement with a chilling, paternal affection, calling them his little daughters. These are the narrow steel cages where space is a luxury and the ability to move is a forgotten dream of the past. Each cage is a masterpiece of geometric cruelty, designed to hold the human form in a state of permanent, agonizing tension. They are the physical manifestations of the monarch's obsession with total and absolute containment. The iron bars of these cages are forged with a specific thickness, ensuring that no amount of human strength can ever bend or break the barrier of the king's will. There is a perverse intimacy in the design, as if the metal were a second skin intended to replace the soft vulnerability of the prisoner's own flesh. Within these confined spaces, the passage of time is measured not by the movement of the sun across the sky, but by the accumulation of rust and the slow weakening of the human spirit. To be placed inside a little daughter is to be erased from the world of the living while the heart still beats. Among the many who fall from grace, none represents the heights of power and the depths of the abyss more than Cardinal Jean La Balue. Once the son of a humble tailor, he rose through the ranks of the church and the state to become the king's most trusted advisor and right hand. He was a man of immense intellect and insatiable ambition, navigating the treacherous waters of the royal court with the grace of a seasoned sailor. For years, he held the keys to the kingdom's treasury and the secrets of the king's most private correspondence, believing himself to be indispensable to the crown. However, the year 1469 brings a discovery that shatters the cardinal's world and reveals the limits of his own cleverness. The king's network of spies, those silent watchers who see through the thickest walls, intercepts a series of secret letters intended for the Duke of Burgundy. These documents reveal that the cardinal has been playing a double game, whispering the king's plans into the ears of his greatest rival. The betrayal is absolute, a jagged tear in the fabric of the monarch's trust that can never be mended by any amount of prayer or political penance. The arrest of the high prelate is swift and devoid of any of the ceremony usually afforded to a prince of the church. He is stripped of his silken robes and his golden rings, replaced by the coarse garments of a common criminal. The transition from the luxury of the episcopal palace to the freezing stone of the dungeon is a shock that leaves his mind reeling in a state of disbelief. He pleads for an audience, for a chance to explain the nuances of his diplomacy, but his words fall on the deaf ears of guards who have seen too many powerful men crumble under the king's silent and heavy displeasure. La Balue is transported to the fortress of Locks, where one of the most infamous little daughters has been prepared specifically for his reception. The cage is barely 8 feet wide and 3 feet high, a metal box that forces the tall and once stately cardinal into a perpetual crouch. As the heavy bolts are slid into place, the metallic clang echoes through the chamber like the tolling of a funeral bell for his very soul. He is left in a darkness so thick that he can no longer distinguish between his open eyes and the void of the cellar, beginning a journey of endurance that few could survive. For 11 long years, the man who once helped govern a nation remains trapped within this steel tomb, his world shrinking to the few square feet of his confinement. During the first few months, he attempts to maintain his dignity, reciting Latin prayers and reliving his greatest diplomatic triumphs in the silence of his mind. But the unrelenting pressure of the iron bars begins to take its toll, slowly crushing the structure of his body and the clarity of his thoughts. The cold seeps into his marrow, and the lack of movement turns his once graceful limbs into stiff, uncooperative burdens. The king does not stay away from the sight of his former friend's misery, but his visits are not motivated by a desire for further interrogation or a thirst for political secrets. Louis XI descends into the bowels of Locks to witness the process of human dissolution as if he were observing a scientific experiment of profound importance. He stands before the cage in his simple grey coat, his leaden saints jingling softly as he watches the cardinal struggle to find a position that does not cause white-hot pain to radiate through his warped and damaged spine. To the monarch, these visits are a form of meditation, a way to verify the absolute nature of his power over those who would dare to deceive him. He looks at the matted hair, the filth-stained skin, and the wild, desperate eyes of the men who once shared his secrets, and he feels a deep, quiet sense of triumph. There is no anger in the king's gaze, only a clinical interest in how much the human spirit can endure before it finally breaks under the weight of total isolation. For Louis, the sight of a broken prelate is a far more satisfying victory than any glorious triumph on the battlefield. As the years turn into a decade, the physical decay of the prisoner becomes a grotesque spectacle of anatomical distortion. The cardinal's joints have begun to fuse in their bent positions, his bones thickening and twisting until he resembles some misshapen creature from a nightmare rather than a man. His skin has grown yellow and leathery, stretched tight over a skeletal frame that can no longer support its own weight without the support of the cage's iron floor. Every breath is a ragged struggle against the constriction of his own ribcage, a constant reminder of the physical cost of his ancient and forgotten sin. The mental breakdown is even more profound than the physical one, as the silence of the dungeon erodes the foundations of the cardinal's formidable intellect. He begins to lose the ability to speak in coherent sentences, his once elegant prose dissolving into a series of low, guttural moans and he talks to the shadows, arguing with ghosts of the past and pleading with the iron bars as if they were sentient beings capable of granting him a moment of mercy. The world outside the fortress has ceased to exist for him, replaced entirely by the immediate and unrelenting reality of his steel-bound agony. During his visits, the king listens to these sounds of madness with a serene and terrifying patience, finding in them the ultimate guarantee of his own safety. He believes that only a man who has been stripped of his reason and his humanity can truly be considered harmless to the state. The incoherent whispers of the cardinal are the only music that can soothe the king's chronic insomnia, providing a tangible proof that his most dangerous rival is now nothing more than a ghost inhabiting a ruined body. The more the prisoner suffers, the more the king feels he can finally breathe without the fear of a hidden dagger. The logic of the Spider King is as cold as the Stone of Locks, predicated on the idea that fear is the only reliable glue that can hold a kingdom together. He uses the fate of La Balou as a silent warning to the rest of the nobility, ensuring that the story of the iron cage is whispered in every castle and tavern across the realm. The image of the cardinal trapped in his little daughter becomes a powerful deterrent, a mental shackle that keeps the dukes and counts of France in a state of nervous obedience. The king has turned one man's prolonged agony into a foundational pillar of his national security. Even as the king's own health begins to fail, he finds strength in the knowledge that his enemies are suffering far more than he is. He sees the cages not as instruments of torture, but as necessary tools of statecraft, as vital to the functioning of the government as the collection of taxes or the administration of justice. In his mind, there is no room for the concept of forgiveness or the weakness of human compassion when the stability of the crown is at stake. The iron boxes are the final answer to the question of loyalty, providing a permanent solution to the problem of political ambition. The relationship between the jailer and the jailed becomes a strange, distorted mirror of their former partnership in the halls of power. They are bound together by the cage, one standing outside in the freedom of his suspicion, the other trapped inside in the slavery of his consequences. Louis XI watches as the man who once plotted to reshape the map of Europe now struggles to grasp a simple bowl of water with his claw-like hands. This inversion of status is the ultimate expression of the king's irony, a dark joke that he shares only with the leaden saints on his hat and the stars above. Eventually, the weight of 11 years of confinement leaves nothing of the original Jean La Balou but a hollow shell of pain and confusion. When the king finally decides to release him, it is not an act of mercy, but a final insult to a man who no longer has the capacity to understand the world he is returning to. The cardinal is pulled from the cage like a heap of discarded rags, his body unable to uncurl and his mind unable to recognize the faces of those who come to collect him. He has been pacified in the most absolute sense, rendered incapable of ever uttering a single word of treason again. The king watches the departure of his former friend with a look of cold indifference, already turning his thoughts to the next name on his list of potential threats. The little daughter at Locks remains empty for only a brief moment before a new occupant is found, for the king's suspicion is an insatiable beast that requires a constant supply of victims. The cycle of surveillance and confinement continues, fueled by the monarch's belief that a kingdom is only as strong as the fear it inspires in its most powerful subjects. The iron cages are the quiet heart of the French state, beating with the rhythm of a master's will. As Louis XI ascends the spiral staircase of the fortress, the sound of his footsteps is the only thing that breaks the heavy silence of the dungeon corridor. He feels a sense of profound peace, knowing that the threads of his web are secure and that the voices of his enemies have been silenced by the cold embrace of the iron bars. For him, the suffering of the individual is a small price to pay for the order and unity of the nation he has built from the ruins of civil war. The Spider King has won another victory in the darkness, and the world outside remains blissfully unaware of the price. This chapter of French history is written in the language of iron and stone, a testimony to a man who understood the utility of cruelty and the power of prolonged observation. The story of Cardinal La Balou serves as a dark reminder that in the court of the Spider King, the distance between the throne and the cage is only a single letter or a whispered secret away. As the night falls over the lawyer, the king sleeps a little sounder, comforted by the memory of the rhythmic clatter of bones against steel and the knowledge that his little daughters are always waiting for their next guest. The year is 1482, and a cold, unnatural stillness has settled over the valley of the lawyer, as if the land itself is holding its breath in anticipation of a great ending. At the heart of this silence stands the fortress of Plessis-les-Tours, no longer a center of vibrant governance but a grim monument to a man's war against his own mortality. Death is no longer a distant abstraction for Louis XI, it has become a persistent visitor that scratches at the reinforced oak of his heavy doors and whispers through the cracks in the masonry. The master of the secret web finds himself caught in a trap of failing flesh and brittle bone. The king has transformed his favorite residence into a terrifying labyrinth of defense, driven by a paranoia that transcends the political and enters the realm of the absolute. He has ordered the castle to be surrounded by 3 separate and concentric rows of massive iron spikes, forged with jagged edges that glint menacingly in the pale winter moonlight. These barriers, known as chevaux de frise, are designed to impale anything that moves with sudden speed, creating a garden of metal thorns that separates the monarch from the world he once ruled with such calculated and silent precision. To approach the walls is to invite a gruesome and immediate end. High above the iron spikes, upon the cold stone battlements, hundreds of professional crossbowmen keep a relentless and unblinking vigil over the surrounding fields and forests. Their orders are as simple as they are brutal. They are to shoot without warning or hesitation at any living creature that crosses the perimeter of the royal grounds. It does not matter if the intruder is a starving beggar seeking alms, a lost traveler, or a high-ranking messenger from the Holy Father in Rome. The king's fear has abolished all distinctions of rank or purpose. The air around the castle is thick with the tension of 1,000 cocked triggers. This self-imposed isolation has turned the sovereign of France into a hunted beast, lurking in the deepest and darkest shadows of his own private lair. He has abandoned the grand halls where he once manipulated the destinies of dukes and kings, retreating instead into a small, claustrophobic suite of rooms that are heavily guarded and rarely aired. The windows are barred and shuttered, blocking out the sight of the open sky which he now perceives as a dangerous and unprotected void. Inside this stone shell, the king paces with the erratic energy of a predator that knows the hunters are closing in, yet cannot see their faces. As his physical strength wanes, Louis turns his desperate attention toward the spiritual realm, attempting to negotiate with the Creator as if he were just another rival monarch to be bribed or outmaneuvered. He has issued urgent commands to bring the most holy men and renowned hermits from every corner of Europe to his bedside, promising them vast fortunes in exchange for a few more days of earthly existence. He believes that the sheer volume of their prayers can act as a shield against the inevitable, creating a divine barricade that can withstand the final assault of the Reaper who waits patiently in the hall. The most prominent among these holy visitors is the simple friar Francesco di Paola, whom the king has summoned from the distant mountains of Calabria with the promise of immense ecclesiastical favors. Louis kneels before this humble man of God, his ink-stained hands trembling as he clutches at the friar's coarse wool robes, pleading for a miracle that no mortal can truly guarantee. The king's piety is a frantic and commercial enterprise, a series of desperate transactions where he offers golden chalices and sacred lands in exchange for the restoration of his withered limbs and the clearing of his clouded, suspicious mind. In addition to the holy men, the royal chambers have become a repository for hundreds of sacred relics gathered from the most prestigious cathedrals and hidden monasteries of the Christian world. The king is surrounded by the yellowed bones of saints, splinters of the true cross encased in crystal, and ancient garments that are said to possess the power to heal the most terminal of afflictions. He touches these objects with a frantic, superstitious intensity, hoping that some fragment of their divine energy will leach into his own cooling blood and restart the failing machinery of his tired and overworked heart. The smell of incense in the rooms is so thick that it nearly masks the underlying scent of decay and the metallic tang of the various medicines that clutter every available surface. Louis has placed his ultimate trust in the hands of his personal physician, Jacques Coitier, a man who has mastered the art of exploiting the king's fear of death for his own immense personal gain. Coitier treats the monarch not as a patient to be comforted, but as a source of endless wealth, demanding thousands of crowns for every bitter draught and every useless treatment he administers to the dying man who sits shivering in the center of the bed. Under the doctor's direction, the king consumes exotic potions made from the dust of crushed oriental pearls and rare gemstones, believing that their material value correlates with their healing potency. He drinks concoctions that would poison a healthy man, his desperation overriding any remnants of the common sense that once made him the most feared diplomat in the world. There are even darker whispers that move like shadows through the corridors of the palace, tales of the king seeking out the blood of young children in a futile and horrific attempt to regain the vitality of his lost youth through forbidden alchemy. Whether these rumors are the product of truth or the malice of his many enemies, they reflect the public's perception of a ruler who has lost his humanity in the pursuit of immortality. The people of France look toward the fortress of Plessis-les-Tours with a mixture of fear and profound disgust, seeing their king as a vampiric figure who has drained the life from the nation and is now attempting to drain it from the very heavens. The distance between the monarch and his subjects has become an unbridgeable chasm of mutual suspicion and silent, simmering resentment that threatens to boil over at any moment. Physically, the king has become a haunting caricature of his former self, his body withering away until the skin hangs in loose, translucent folds over a frame that seems to be made of nothing but dry tinder. His eyes, once sharp and darting, are now sunken deep within their sockets, burning with a feverish and manic light that suggests a mind teetering on the edge of a total psychological collapse. He has lost the ability to stand for long periods, and his voice has thinned to a dry, raspy whistle that barely carries across the small room, yet his orders remain as sharp and as merciless as they ever were. The irony of his condition is not lost on those few servants who are permitted to remain in his presence and witness the daily ritual of his decline. The man who once took a perverse pleasure in locking his enemies in tiny iron cages now finds himself trapped in a prison of his own construction, unable to leave the small perimeter of his sickbed. His movements are as restricted as those of the prisoners in his dungeons, his spine curving into the same question mark shape that he once forced upon the rebellious lords and bishops of his realm. The Spider King is finally being strangled by the very threads he spun so carefully. In the dead of night, Lewis often demands that the lights be increased until the room is a blinding glare of candlelight, for he fears the darkness and what might be hiding within it. He speaks to the leaden figures of the saints on his hat, which now rests on the bedside table, asking them for signs and portents that the dawn will actually arrive. The silence of the castle is punctuated only by the occasional clatter of a crossbowman's armor on the roof or the distant, muffled moan of a prisoner who still lingers in the depths below, sounds that remind the king of the world he is so desperately trying to hold on to. He has forbidden any mention of the word death in his presence, as if by banishing the name he can banish the entity itself from his consciousness. His courtiers must use elaborate circumlocutions to describe the passing of others, creating a linguistic web of denial that mirrors the physical defenses of the castle walls. This refusal to acknowledge the inevitable has created an atmosphere of profound unreality within the royal suite, where the king acts as if he is preparing for a new military campaign while his lungs struggle to pull in the heavy, stagnant air of his self-imposed tomb. The once vast network of spies and informants continues to send reports to the fortress, but the king no longer has the strength or the focus to process the information. The letters pile up on his desk, their wax seals unbroken, as the business of the state begins to drift and stall in the absence of its central engine. The invisible threads that once connected every village in France to the king's fingers are fraying and snapping, leaving the nation in a state of nervous transition as the power of the central sun begins to dim and flicker out in the encroaching gloom of the evening. Every shadow on the wall is perceived as a potential assassin, and the king has been known to lash out with a hidden dagger at the mere movement of a tapestry in a sudden breeze. His paranoia has reached its logical conclusion, where the only person he can truly trust is himself, and even his own body has betrayed him in the most fundamental way. He is a ruler without an heir he trusts, a master without a servant he believes, and a man without a god he does not try to manipulate. He stands on the precipice of the unknown, clutching his gold and his relics with a grip that is as fierce as it is futile. The 3 rows of iron spikes remain outside, rusting in the damp air of the lawyer, a physical testament to the futility of trying to lock out the inevitable transition of time. The crossbowmen remain at their posts, their eyes straining into the darkness, but they cannot see the enemy that has already bypassed their defenses and is currently sitting at the foot of the king's bed. Louis XI, the great master of the world's most intricate and deadly games, is finally playing a match where the rules are fixed and the outcome has been determined since the moment of his first breath. As the chapter of his life draws toward its inevitable and agonizing close, the king remains a figure of profound and tragic complexity. He is the architect of a unified France, yet he dies in a state of total fragmentation, his mind and body falling apart in the very fortress he built to protect them. The silence of the spider's nest is now absolute, broken only by the ragged breathing of a man who spent his life watching others suffer and is now being forced to watch his own slow and methodical destruction. The web is silent, the hunter is exhausted, and the night is coming to claim its most difficult and defiant prize. The final hours of August in the year 1483 descend upon the fortress of Plessis-les-Tours with a heavy, suffocating heat that seems to radiate from the very stones. Inside the royal apartments, the atmosphere is thick with the scent of stale incense and the metallic tang of dried blood and medicine. The great spider of France is no longer weaving threads across Europe, he is confined to a space so small and cramped that it mirrors the iron cages he once designed for his enemies. The once mighty monarch is reduced to a shadow flickering in the dim light of a few guttering candles. This tiny, stifling bedroom has become the final boundary of a kingdom that once stretched from the Atlantic to the Rhine. Every piece of heavy furniture and every thick tapestry seems to press inward, stealing the oxygen from a man whose lungs are already failing him. The walls are lined with sacred relics and golden icons, yet they provide no comfort, only a cold and indifferent audience for the labor of his final breaths. There is a terrible symmetry in this confinement, as if the universe has finally forced the king into the same physical limitations he imposed upon so many others. Outside the bolted door, the future of the nation waits in the form of his son, the Dauphin, yet the king has forbidden entry to his own flesh and blood. In his fever-racked mind, the young prince is not a grieving child but merely another ambitious conspirator, a scavenger waiting for the lion to draw its last breath so he can seize the crown. This ultimate rejection is the final triumph of a life built on the pillar of absolute suspicion, where even the bond of family is viewed as a potential vector for betrayal. The king chooses to face the void in total isolation, surrounded by shadows. The silence in the hallway is unnatural, broken only by the distant, rhythmic clinking of the armored guards on the battlements who still watch for an enemy that has already entered the bedchamber. These men, handpicked for their lack of imagination and absolute obedience, stand as stone-faced sentinels over a dying era. They do not speak, for the king's orders regarding silence remain in force even as his life force ebbs away. The very air of the castle seems to have solidified, trapping everyone in a moment of historical stasis where the past and the future collide in the heat of a summer night. Inside the room, Louis struggles against the weight of the blankets, his thin arms flailing like the legs of an upturned insect. He is fighting a battle that no amount of gold can win and no secret treaty can delay. Every gasp for air is a ragged, whistling sound that echoes off the low ceiling, a sharp contrast to the silent, invisible whispers he used to control the fate of millions. The master of the web is finally entangled in the fraying strands of his own biological reality, discovering that death is the only power in the universe that refuses to be bribed or intimidated by him. His mind, once a brilliant machine of calculation, now drifts through the dark galleries of his memory, revisiting the faces of those he left to rot in his iron boxes. He sees the curved spines and the hollow eyes of the men who went mad in the silence of his dungeons, and for the first time, he feels the weight of the iron against his own soul. The darkness of the room begins to take on their shapes, pressing against his chest with the force of 1,000 unspoken accusations. He tries to cry out for his astrologer or his physician, but his throat is as dry as the parchment he used. The flickering candlelight casts long, distorted shadows across the floor, making it seem as though the very room is shrinking around the royal bed. Louis reaches out to touch the leaden saints on his nightstand, his fingers trembling with a palsy that he can no longer hide. These small, cheap figurines have been his only confidants for decades, yet they remain as silent and unmoving as the corpses he produced in the name of national unity. He realizes with a jolt of primal terror that he has spent his life building a fortress of fear, only to find himself the only inhabitant left inside. As the clock strikes the final hour of his reign, the king's heart begins to falter, its rhythm becoming as erratic as the movements of a fly caught in a web. He feels the coldness creeping up from his feet, a numbing sensation that no wool blanket or hearth fire can repel. He clenches his teeth, trying to hold onto the consciousness that is slipping away like sand through his ink-stained fingers. The great game of kingship is ending, and the board is being cleared by a hand far more ruthless than his own. He is no longer the sovereign of France, but a dying animal. The absolute silence that follows the final, ragged exhale of the king is more terrifying than any scream of agony heard in the depths of his prisons. For a long time, nothing moves within the room, the candles burn down to their waxen stumps and the air grows even more stagnant. The power that once held the entire nation in a grip of terror has dissipated into the gloom, leaving behind only a physical vessel that is no longer capable of command. The kingdom outside continues to turn, unaware that the central pillar of its reality has finally collapsed into the dust of history. When the dawn of the next day finally breaks, the sun's first rays struggle to penetrate the thick, barred windows of the royal suite. The servants and officials, sensing a change in the atmosphere, eventually find the courage to override the standing orders and force the heavy door open. They enter with their heads bowed, expecting to see a monarch at rest, but the sight that greets them freezes the blood in their veins. The room is a chaotic scene of spiritual and physical desperation, filled with the debris of a man who tried to buy his way into heaven with silver and relics. Upon the lavish bed lies a sight that will haunt the witnesses for the rest of their lives, a vision of human ruin that defies the dignity of the crown. It is not a king they find, but a shriveled, grotesque creature that seems to have been crushed by an invisible weight. The body is twisted into an unnatural shape, the spine curved so sharply that the chin almost touches the knees, mirroring the exact posture of the wretches who spent years in his little daughters. The transition from the most powerful men in Europe to this pathetic heap of flesh is a shock that silences all courtly protocol. The most chilling detail is the state of the king's hands, which are locked in a permanent, claw-like grip upon the expensive silk sheets. His fingers have dug deep into the fabric, tearing the delicate material as he attempted to anchor himself to the world of the living. It appears as though he was trying to pull the very bed beneath him, a final, desperate gesture of possession over a reality that was already fading into the void. The knuckles are white and the skin is translucent, revealing the skeletal structure of a man who never learned how to let go of anything he once held. As the physicians approach to examine the remains, they find that the limbs are so stiff and fused that the body cannot be straightened for a proper burial without the sound of cracking bone. The king has died in the posture of his own cruelty, his physical form permanently recording the malice and the restrictions he imposed upon his realm. The horror of the realization spreads through the room like a contagion. The man who united France with a will of iron has been transformed into a physical testament to the suffering he inflicted. He is the ultimate victim of his own design, a master of cages. The horror in the room transitions into a somber, fearful awe as the onlookers realize the depth of the irony that has claimed their sovereign. Louis XI has left behind a kingdom that is strong, centralized, and secure, yet he himself has departed in a state of total fragmentation and terror. He built a nation by breaking individuals, and in the end, he was the one most broken of all. The web of spies and the network of secret prisons have all led to this single, suffocating bedroom where the greatest predator of the age found himself trapped in a cage of his own making. The servants begin the grim task of preparing the body, their movements hurried and their eyes averted from the contorted face of the dead king. They can feel the lingering presence of his suspicion in the air, as if his ghost is still watching from the corners of the room, looking for a sign of disrespect to punish. The heavy incense is replaced by the smell of funeral spices, but the atmosphere of the spider's nest remains, a cold and clinging legacy that will take generations to wash away from the stones of Plessis-les-Tours. The king is dead, but the fear he cultivated remains alive. In the final assessment of the court, the king is viewed as a man who traded his humanity for a map, and his soul for a sense of absolute control that proved to be an illusion in the face of the grave. He died as he lived, surrounded by walls and thorns, trusting no one and being trusted by none. The legacy of his reign is a unified France, but the price of that unity is etched into the twisted bones of his corpse. He was the architect of a new world, yet he was too frightened to ever step out of the dark shadows of the old one he helped to destroy. The coffin that eventually holds the remains of the Spider King must be specially constructed to accommodate his warped and unyielding posture. Even in death, he refuses to conform to the standard expectations of a monarch, remaining a jagged and difficult figure that resists the comfort of a straight line. As the lid is lowered, the clinking of the leaden saints on his hat provides a final, metallic farewell to a man who saw the heavens as just another court to be manipulated. The heavy wood is sealed, and the great spider is finally laid to rest within the center of his eternal and silent web. The history of the kingdom will remember him as a genius and a monster, a man who understood the mechanics of power but failed to understand the basic necessity of human connection. He suffocated in a cocoon of his own hatred and suspicion, a self-imposed prison that offered no exit even as he crossed the threshold into the afterlife. The story of Louis XI ends not with a flourish of trumpets or a grand eulogy, but with the chilling image of a man who became exactly what he feared and exactly what he hated. The web is empty, but the threads still shimmer in the cold light. The final irony remains that the very peace he brought to France was born from the womb of his personal torment and the suffering of those he considered his enemies. He was the necessary demon of his age, a man who did the dark work of statecraft so that others might live in a more stable world. Yet, as the people of France begin to breathe the air of a new era, they do so with a shudder, remembering the men who listened to the staccato beat of bones against iron and called it the music of victory. The king's journey is over, but the shadow of the cage lingers. As the sun sets on the day of his burial, the fortress of Plessis-les-Tours stands silent and formidable against the horizon, its iron spikes still guarding a heart that no longer beats. The era of the Spider King has passed into the realm of legend and nightmare, leaving behind a nation that is both stronger and more scarred than it was before his arrival. In the end, there was no exit for Louis from the web of his own creation, only a slow and methodical descent into the darkness he had spent his life perfecting. The silence of the August night is finally absolute and enduring.